If you're an automotive employer and you're already short on hands, then the wrong training delivery method could cause chaos for both you and your apprentices. In this video, I'm going to talk through each training delivery option, the pros, the cons, the costs, the considerations, to help you make the most informed decision on what's best for you, your business and your apprentice. So in an apprenticeship, the apprentice is employed to do a job, but they also have a mandated set amount of hours that they have to complete as learning on top of their job role. These are called off-the-job hours. Moving forwards, every apprenticeship standard will carry with it an associated number of off-the-job hours that need to be completed prior to endpoint assessment. But a typical rule of thumb is that about 20% of their working week should be allocated for off-the-job working. This is where things can get messy because that 20% has to be allocated. So it's really important that this is done around your bookings, around your bays, around your mentor's time and capacity, and around your customer commitments. If you're not doing this properly, the risk is that you're constantly rescheduling and shuffling things around, which not only cause disruption to your business, but it also makes the apprentice feel as though they're just being passed from pillar to post. The next two methods that we'll be talking through contribute towards achieving that 20% off the job requirement. But it's always important that both employers and apprentices understand that independent work has to be done in order to complete an apprenticeship successfully. The first delivery method is a day release model. And this is where an apprentice would typically spend 1 day per week at a local college or training provider. And this is set up to replicate the school system, so with half-term summer holidays. This traditionally has been the most common or most associated delivery method when it comes to an apprenticeship and has been most popular in years gone by. What this means is that the apprentice spends 1 day at college and the rest of the time they're working within your business. This day counts towards the off-the-job hours, but it has to be done within paid working hours. With day release, you're able to really build a rhythm. So the apprentice goes into the local college or training provider for that 1 day a week. They learn new skills, knowledge and behaviours, and then they come back into your business and put that into practice immediately. This allows them to really get hands-on. It allows them to practice and refine what they've just been taught. For example, a first-year service and maintenance apprentice. They're working within your business Monday to Thursday, and every Friday they go to the local training provider. There, they learn a mix of theory and practical work, but they're also completing their portfolio and maybe some assessment-based activities. The following week, you deliberately give them tasks that match what they've just been learning the week prior. The mentor and manager review this so that you can sign off on their activities and help them keep pace with their apprenticeship. The only real cost that you need to consider with the day release model are the transport or cost to get the apprentice to and from college. So the pros with the day release model, well, firstly, it's incredibly predictable. You know that there's 1 day every week your apprentice is going to be out of your business. So this gives you the opportunity to really schedule time best in terms of your bookings, your mentor availability and activities for that apprentice. You've then got the fact that the learning is spaced out, which allows really steady progress and good retention rates. It's easier for most providers to deliver this model consistently because it's fairly standard, but it also lends itself really well to a continual routine of gathering evidence, review and support. So the cons that we see with day release, and what I would say is we have seen a shift away from this being the most popular model to people being a little bit more hesitant. One of the reasons for that is that a lot of the local colleges are no longer able to run the courses that they previously were due to not enough uptake or a lack of funding. Alongside that, there are also questions around how relevant a lot of those courses are when delivered locally in terms of quality of equipment and quality of training and continuity with lecturers, support managers within those local facilities. Some employers can find this model quite disruptive because it's a weekly hit to capacity, and for those smaller teams you haven't always necessarily got cover. With weekly sessions, it may also mean that the training the apprentice is receiving doesn't necessarily align with the activities or tasks that you're wanting them to complete within your business. If you haven't got a local training provider, it may also mean that the travel to and from colleges for your apprentice result in extra long days, and this could have a knock-on or long-term impact to their well-being. The second method is block release, and this is where an apprentice works within your business for a chunk of time and then they'll go away to, again, a college or a training provider, but they'll stay there for an extended period of time, typically a week or so. This often happens on a cycle basis, so it may be that they're with you for 5 weeks and then they do a week at the training provider. That then repeats throughout the entire duration of the apprenticeship. Block release still counts towards the off-the-job hours. It's just delivered in bigger chunks. But again, it does still mean that independent work is going to be required. When block release is set up well, it can work really well for businesses because it provides longer-term consistency. So they're with you for an extended period of time, but then there's a week in which they're out of your business. This can work particularly well when you've got quite high dependency on some internal staff members, so they can get a bit of a break, but also a bit of a refocus while that apprentice is off-site. The idea is that you as the employer have a full understanding of everything your apprentice is going to be learning and when, scheduled in advance, so that when they're on block and they're learning a particular module through practical theory and evidence-based learning, you can then arrange for activities and jobs for them to complete when they're back that directly correlate to the new skills that they've just learned. This is the most expensive way of doing things because you, as the employer, are obligated to pay for the travel to and from the training provider, but also then accommodation and expenses for the period of time that your apprentice is away. Typically, we can see costs of £120 to £150 per night for accommodation and meals. So it's always something to consider when you're budgeting for your apprenticeship program. The practical question employers have to ask themselves is this: can your business absorb the bigger periods without the apprentice? And can the apprentice comfortably manage the travel and accommodation of a block release training provider? Once you've understood this, well, then you've got your answer. So let's look at the pros of block release. Well, firstly, there's prolonged periods of time within your workshop, which allows you to get consistency, but also plan jobs, activities, and mentorship. There's definitely less weekly disruption through a block release model over a day release. And this delivery method works really nicely for employers who are really keen to embed their apprentices as a proper member of the team from day one. There's also some pros that kind of sit outside of just the apprenticeship, and this is really about developing that apprentice as an individual. So they're gaining things like time management skills, responsibility, punctuality, because they're solely responsible for getting themselves to that training provider that may be a further distance away, staying independently, working the same with a team or peers, and ultimately coming back more of a well-rounded individual. With both block release and day release, you're using external training providers or external facilities for the delivery method. So your apprentices are really feeling part of the industry. They're accessing maybe newer techniques or tools that don't necessarily sit within your business, and they're able to see that there's a wider world outside of just their apprenticeship. So let's get into the cons of block release. As we said, it is the most expensive when it comes to funding of a delivery method, but it also potentially raises capacity issues. If your apprentice really does become embedded in your team early on, then who's going to cover maybe weeks at a time when they're out of the business? It can also lead to things feeling quite clunky because you've got an apprentice that's out of their training provider environment for an extended period of time. And if that learning isn't reinforced in the workplace, it can cause a drop in motivation, but also a drop in progress. So before I move on to the final delivery method, if you're an apprentice employer that wants to have amazing apprentice talent, retain them and support them properly, well, that's exactly what Apprenticeship Central do. We help you build a proper program end to end. So from finding brilliant apprentice talent through to setting up the right training delivery partner, to supporting them and providing long-term visibility, consistency, and also your safeguarding support. If we can help your business, like we do Fix Auto, LKQ, and many others, then hit the link in the description to book a discovery call. So let's get back into it. Finally, we have the fully work-based delivery model. And what this means is that the apprentice stays with you within your workplace full-time. They're allocated a coach from an external training provider that either visits your site to deliver training in person or remote through online sessions, webinars, and drop-ins. All of this work still counts towards their off-the-job hours, and it's only at endpoint assessment that they will potentially leave your business to become fully qualified. The training still has to happen in paid hours and also in allocated and protected time for the apprentice. So the only real difference here is the format rather than the requirements. When it's done properly, this model works brilliantly, and it's also why we're seeing it becoming increasingly important. We place more apprentices through on-site delivery than we did any other delivery model over the past 12 months. And this is because it gives employers greater visibility over exactly what their apprentice is learning, but it also gives them exposure and more time within your business. So they're learning on your equipment that you actually use on a day-to-day business. They're working with your team, and they're really aligning themselves to your values, your vision, and your way of doing things. There are less external resources, pressures, or exposure to things that maybe wouldn't necessarily be how you'd want something to be delivered. For example, you have an apprentice that's with you Monday through to Friday. Every 6 weeks or so, their external coach will visit them on site and they'll deliver a module. What happens then is the coach leaves and the apprentice puts into practice the knowledge, skills, and behaviours they've just been taught. They then need an allocated time to really work on their apprenticeship. So every Wednesday afternoon is scheduled for them with a proper workstation set up so that they can upload evidence to their portfolio. They can make sure that they're on top of their coursework and that they don't fall behind in preparation for EPA. So the cost with this model, well, there really aren't any. You're not paying for accommodation or expenses because, as I say, that apprentice is with you Monday through to Friday, and the cost of the coach coming into your site, well, that's covered under the apprenticeship funding. There is, however, a bit of a trade-off in terms of time, energy, and commitment from your internal teams. Because that apprentice is with you on a full-time capacity, there does really need to be that buy-in from the wider business, and that needs to be factored in. So let's get into the pros. Well, when it comes to disruption, well, it's minimal because you've got that external coach coming in on a 4 to 6 week cycle and it's for maximum 1 day. So the apprentice, there's less variables, less risk, less that they have to consider or worry about other than getting into their employer's place of work every day. When it comes to the learning, this can often happen quicker because they're immersed in your environment on a full-time basis. But also, as we mentioned, it gives employers that greater visibility and clarity over their apprentices' development. So the cons, and I think this really comes down to the type of environment that you're operating in, the type of people that you've got within your business when it comes to mentors, pastoral support, and even safeguarding, because there absolutely is a greater reliance on you as a business to ensure that that apprentice is getting everything they need in order to develop fully. There's also the risk that things can feel invisible and that apprentice is just treated like a normal member of staff without clear check-ins, clear reviews, and clear communication. And lastly, if your workshop's already stretched, it can be hard to find the time or protect that time that is so critical in obtaining an apprenticeship. So, quick recap before we move on. Day release model. You lose your apprentice 1 day per week. It's clear, it's structured, it's scheduled. It's been tried and tested. It's the most common in days gone by, but it isn't something that's readily available to all employers now. Then we have block release, and this is really a chunked delivery method. So they stay with you for a fixed period of time, and then they go off to a training provider for a week or so. This gives you greater reach to training providers that might be further afield or more specialist, but it also means you can really structure a development plan based on what they're learning and bring those skills back into the business. And lastly, we've got fully work-based, which is where they're with you full-time. This can be the smoothest operationally, but it's absolutely vital that their training time is protected. With all three delivery methods, it's absolutely vital that you as an employer understand that the apprentice needs to get their 20% or so off the job hours completed. They can't do this without the right tooling, the right equipment, access to a computer, a space to work, and that protected and honoured time. Without this, they can't complete their apprenticeship. So regardless of which delivery model you choose, this has to be baked in. So now you know the main delivery options, but what comes next is actually what most employers struggle with first, and that's how to get the apprenticeship properly started. We've created a full guide which covers everything you need to know about apprenticeships, from hiring to funding to delivery methods to onboarding to how to properly set them up for success and get them through EPA completion. It's a one-stop guide for any automotive employer. And if you want to watch the video next, then click the video on the screen.